At 21:43 local time, the destroyer's surface picture fractured into 7 fast contacts ripping out of the haze at more than 40 knots. That alone did not shock anyone. The Persian Gulf had trained crews to expect harassment profiles, aggressive approaches, radio silence, camera boats, sharp turns meant to provoke a reaction and harvest a headline. Fast attack craft were dangerous, yes, but familiar. Familiar meant manageable. Familiar meant doctrine. Then the 8th contact appeared. It was slower than the others, holding just 11 knots on a clean offset north of the transit lane, never committing, never closing, never drifting outside a strangely exact line relative to the destroyer's bow. It did not look like the most dangerous contact on the screen. In the first 20 seconds, it barely looked relevant at all. That was the contact Lieutenant Mara Keene kept staring at. Inside combat, the room had already gone from routine watchfulness to compressed focus. Bearings were being called. Relative motion was updating every few seconds. The captain was on internal comms. The bridge wanted recommendations. The surface warfare coordinator was working through rules of engagement, classification thresholds, and escalation ladders that had been rehearsed 100 times because in the Gulf, the line between intimidation and attack was always thin, always political, and always measured in seconds. 7 boats fast. 1 boat slow. The fast boats made immediate tactical sense. They split wide, then converged in pairs, not in a clean naval formation but in that hard-to-model pattern small craft use when they're trying to overload judgment instead of armor. 2 pushed on the starboard bow. 3 angled aft toward the destroyer's quarter. 2 more held outside gun range, weaving in and out of commercial wake lines. Their speed created urgency. Their geometry created noise. Their presence demanded attention. Which was precisely why Keene distrusted the boat doing almost no thing. At 7.9 nautical miles, the slow contact showed intermittent return strength. Not weak. Wrong. It would brighten, dim, stretch, then snap back into a neat track. Sea clutter could do that. Tanker wake could do that. Coastal interference could do that too, especially in warm night air over crowded water. But this track was repeating the distortion at almost perfectly regular intervals, every 4 to 5 seconds, as if the environment had suddenly become metronomic. The combat system did what combat systems are designed to do. It tried to help. Track association began multiplying. 1 starboard contact split into 2 possible solutions, then remerged. Another boat's speed estimate jumped from 36 knots to 18, then back to 39. The system was not failing outright. That would have been obvious. It was doing something worse. It was becoming slightly less trustworthy at exactly the moment the crew needed precision most. And in a close-water small craft engagement, slight errors become lethal. The bridge reported visible wakes at bearing 095. Combat reported 9 viable tracks, then 11, then 8 confirmed and 3 suspect. The captain asked the only question that mattered: were they seeing boats, or were they seeing a manipulated picture? Keene didn't answer immediately. She leaned over the surface display and watched the replay stack at accelerated speed. Fast boats cut hard. Ghost returns lagged. Real hulls jittered in clutter and then stabilized. But the slow contact was doing something cleaner. Its shadow was not random. It was delayed. Not by much. 3 seconds. Sometimes 4. Always aft of the main return. Always on the same relative axis. A towed reflector. Not a guess. Not a theory. A mechanism. A small craft towing a radar enhancer behind it on a cable could create a stretched signature, sometimes even a duplicate track depending on aspect, sea state, and processing logic. Cheap. Simple. Effective. Not because it fooled a dest royer into seeing a battleship, but because it forced a high-end combat system to spend precious seconds cleaning up ambiguity. In open ocean, that was an inconvenience. In a narrow Gulf transit lane packed with merchant returns, it was a bandwidth attack. That changed the entire problem. The swarm was no longer just 7 or 8 armed boats trying to get close. It was a coordinated effort to corrupt the destroyer's track logic, fragment fire control confidence, and pull defensive attention into the wrong places. Every extra phantom contact forced classification checks. Every uncertain range gate delayed weapons assignment. Every false split increased the chance of wasting a warning burst, hesitating on a real shooter, or misreading a closing angle near civilian traffic. The boats were not just approaching the ship. They were attacking how the ship understood them. Keane called it out flat, without drama. Slow mover is towing a reflector. Recommend downgrade autocorrelation in sector blue, manual priority by wake and thermal separation. Treat ghosts as derivatives, not primaries. That was the human moment. Small. Technical. Decisive. Because the destroyer's advantage was not only missiles, guns, or radar power. It was disciplined interpretation. Once the crew understood that the surface picture itself was under attack, the engagement stopped being a swarm problem and became a sorting problem. And sorting problems can be solved, if someone recognizes them before the timeline collapses. The captain shifted posture immediately. The ship altered course 12 degrees to port. It looked minor on paper. On the water, it changed almost everything. The turn forced the starboard cluster to recalculate intercept geometry, exposed the slow contact's cable angle against the moon sheen, and separated one of the merged returns from the wake of a passing merchant hull. The destroyer was no longer giving the attackers the same aspect picture. It was making them show EIR work. That is when the first real danger finally became visible. One of the fast boats on the starboard bow did not continue its aggressive approach. It decelerated just enough to stabilize, then turned broadside for a fraction of a minute, long enough for optics to catch the boxy outline of a launcher frame under canvas. Not a machine gun harassment boat. A missile-capable platform or something close enough that the distinction no longer mattered. The bridge ordered warning signals. Whistles. Lights. Radio challenge on maritime guard. No response. The 25mm mounts were trained out. Crew-served weapons tracked. The destroyer was still inside the legal and operational discipline that modern warships have to maintain in crowded water. But now the margin was shrinking fast, because the attackers had used the ghosting effect exactly as intended. They had dragged the crew through ambiguity until the window for a clean, early response was nearly gone. 30 seconds earlier, a burst might have looked premature. 30 seconds later, it might look desperate. That is the trap of precision harassment. It is designed to weaponize hesitation. Keane's next call was even more important than the first. She did not tell combat to engage the nearest boat. She told them to kill the picture attack first. Disable the tow contact. It sounded counterintuitive. The slow boat was not the closest. It was not the loudest. It was not the one visibly presenting weapons. But it was the one degrading everyone else's math. As long as that reflector stayed in the water, every response would carry friction. Every track would arrive with doubt attached. The forward mount fired. Not into the boat at first. Into the water just ahead and slightly abaft, where the cable line had to be if Keane's read was correct. The first burst walked across black water. The second stitched closer. Then the ocean itself flashed white around a thin shape nobody had been able to see on optics. Until rounds hit spray around it. The cable snapped. The radar picture changed in less than 5 seconds. 2 suspect tracks vanished entirely. One split contact collapsed into a single clean fast mover. Thermal contrast sharpened on 3 starboard boats that had been partially masked by reflector distortion. The combat display stopped arguing with itself. It still showed danger. But now it showed real danger. And real danger can be killed. The starboard pair accelerated again, too late to hide intent now. One angled inward toward what looked like a rocket envelope. Another tried to cross ahead of the bow. The classic small craft moved to complicate the gun solution and forced the larger ship to choose between collision avoidance and target prosecution. Aft, two more boats broke wider, perhaps to preserve a second axis, perhaps because their timing had just been destroyed and they knew it. The destroyer answered with sequencing, not panic. Warning burst. Disable. Shift. Reassess. Repeat. The nearest armed contact took the first deliberate engagement. Short, controlled fire. Not cinematic. Not wasteful. A disciplined stream that walked from waterline to engine block. The boat did not explode into a movie fireball. It sagged, threw spray unevenly, then yawed hard as propulsion died. Another fast mover tried to use its crippled partner as clutter, darting through the wake to complicate line of fire. Combat did not chase it visually. They held on stabilized track, waited for the crossing angle to widen, and hit it as it cleared. Aft sectors were now compressing. The two widest boats had counted on the destroyer's attention being fixed forward, where speed and spectacle were concentrated. Instead, with the false tracks gone, the ship could see their geometry for what it was, not an immediate strike, but an attempt to pin maneuver options and keep the destroyer inside a narrow lane while the bow contacts tested the reaction chain. Once the forward danger was cut down, the aft threat lost its purpose. One boat broke away first. The other pushed a few seconds too long and drew disabling fire at just under 3,000 yards. 3 threats neutralized. But not the most dangerous one. Because the real lesson of the encounter was not that small boats could be stopped. Navies already knew that. The real lesson was how close the destroyer had come to fighting the wrong battle. If Keane had treated the event as a simple rush attack, the ship would have responded to the fastest contacts first, exactly as the attackers expected. The reflector boat would have remained untouched. The picture would have stayed dirty. The track confidence would have remained unstable. And one launcher boat, hidden inside all that uncertainty, might have reached a firing posture before the ship ever received a clean engagement solution. That is how expensive platforms get surprised by cheap ones. Not because the cheap weapon is stronger. Because it is placed at the seam between systems. By now the remaining craft were no longer a coordinated assault. They were fragments. One circled out beyond effective harassment distance. Another dumped speed and turned cold toward darker water near the coast. A third, perhaps never armed in the first place, simply vanished into commercial traffic and shore glow, its tactical purpose complete the moment the first minute of confusion had been created. Combat did not celebrate. Damage control reported no hits. Sensors were stable. Weapon status remained green. Externally, the destroyer had won cleanly. Internally, the mood in combat was colder than that. The crew understood what they had just seen. Not bravado. Not chaos. Not random recklessness. It had been a test, of doctrine, of patience, of machine trust, of whether a high-end warship could be pushed into wasting time on a falsified surface picture in one of the most compressed waterways on Earth. And for a short stretch of water, it had nearly worked. Later, when analysts replayed the data, the engagement would look almost disappointingly clinical. Speed changes. Bearing shifts. Track fragmentation. A minor course correction. 2 carefully timed gun actions. Several boats disabled or driven off. No dramatic speech. No heroic close-up. Just professionals solving a problem before the problem fully materialized. That is usually what survival looks like at sea. Not brilliance in the Hollywood sense. Recognition. Recognition before the error propagates. Recognition before the system becomes committed to the wrong interpretation. Recognition before procedure hardens into delay. That night, the most valuable weapon on the destroyer was not the gun that fired first or the radar that reached farthest. It was the judgment that understood one slow contact mattered more than 7 fast ones. Because the Persian Gulf punishes lazy reading. Its water is narrow. Its traffic is dense. Its coastlines are close enough to hide intent but not close enough to remove risk. Everything happens inside overlapping thresholds: visual, legal, tactical, political. In that environment, the side that controls perception often controls the first minute. And the side that controls the first minute can make even superior defenses look clumsy, late, or blind. This time, the destroyer took that minute back. But only barely. Because what sailed toward that ship was not merely a cluster of fast attack boats. It was a low-cost theory of naval warfare: use clutter against clarity, use cheap hulls against expensive logic, and force a modern warship to waste certainty before it spends ammunition. That theory failed in the end. The boats were neutralized. The transit continued. The hull remained intact. But the coldest fact was left behind on the screen after the last track faded. The destroyer had not survived because the threat was small. It survived because someone noticed that one contact, moving at just 11 knots, was lying differently than the others.